Last week, while Prime Minister Netanyahu was meeting with President Donald Trump, Steve Bannon on his popular War Room show had me on as a guest to talk about the importance of this meeting. And at one point in the interview, he asked me to respond to those in the America First movement like Tucker Carlson who oppose U.S. cooperation with Israel in taking down the Iranian regime. Have a look at this clip.
Rabbi, you have a powerful and rising part of the MAGA movement, and particularly on the America First national security policy, and that is, I would call the Tucker Carlson, Darren, Beattie, Kurt Mills, and these are some of the smartest people we have in this movement, and huge followers of President Trump. And I would actually add Grace Chung, who runs our social media user, that there's not an insignificant amount, probably 50-50 of even the War Room posse, that is in the social media and in the chat rooms and talk about it all the time, that a tripwire for them, and if you mention war with Persia, if you mention even airstrikes on Iran or Persia, they literally say, okay, we can't do that. What do you say to those folks to say, hey, maybe you're not thinking of this? What would be your outreach to them to try to get them on board, where these are the folks that are saying, hey, too much of this is the tail wagging the dog in the Middle East. We don't really have a fight over there. It's not our, we hear Bannon, we hear Gaffney, we hear the jihad, the anti-jihad crowd, but we're not buying it. We still think the tail wags the dog, and we're adamantly opposed to this. Now, if Bibi, and you said it right there, and I agree with you, it's his life's work. He thinks he believes in his heart of hearts it's an existential threat, and I believe he feels that on his watch he has to take care of it. And we don't know of how long his watch is going to last. So what do you say to that? What do you say to that element of the America First that's pretty adamantly opposed to this, sir?
Well, first, what I said earlier, and that is that Iran's nefarious behavior is not limited to the Middle East. They're also funding a lot of what's going on your southern border, and they're working very closely with the cartels. They are actively an enemy of America, not only in theory. I would also point to the Iranian people who are suffering under this regime. Iran is actually not a very religious population. They have the lowest mosque attendance per capita of any Muslim nation, and you have a suffering population that's actually quite pro-Western and even pro-Israel, that is suffering under the mullahs and much akin to the Lao Beijing out in China. But mainly, I would also argue that you're just kicking the can down the road if you don't deal with Iran. And we have an opportunity. The regime is teetering. The regime is on the verge of collapse. And the time to change things. Why should we live in perpetuity with this Sharia supremacist jihadist regime that started in 1979? It's not a law of nature that they have to be governing one of the largest nations in the Middle East. And if the Iranian mullah's regime were to fall, this isn't like Syria. It wouldn't be replaced by some other radical group. Iran is quite an advanced, fairly Western nation. If you think about what it was under the Shah, you would have a very powerful partner with the West. It would have, and the ripple effect of peace throughout the world would be incredible. And this is very much a national security issue for the United States as well. The Iranian regime, if it's not dealt with, if it remains in power, especially if it continues to sell its oil, which Donald Trump is putting a stop to. But if the Iranian regime remains in power, there will be jihad. Jihad is not just a hobby of theirs. Jihad is what they put their money into, not into their own people. There will be jihad continuing throughout the Middle East, throughout Europe, throughout South America, and into the United States in perpetuity, so long as that regime is in power. That's what I would say to them.
I'll be sharing another clip from that interview in just a couple minutes, but just to understand what happened there, earlier in the interview, I had mentioned that Iran does not only fund Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and the threats to Israel and to the region in the Middle East, but going back more than a decade, Iran has been funding Hezbollah branches in Venezuela and Paraguay. Yes, there's actually a Hezbollah South and Central America, and that Hezbollah branch is very involved in the drug trade and the human trafficking trade. And in fact, they have for years been business partners with the Mexican cartel. So a lot of the human trafficking and drug trafficking that's coming across the southern border has direct Iranian involvement. My point was that Iran already today is an enemy of the United States. They always call the United States the Great Satan and speak about taking down the United States. And even more importantly, Iran signed a 25-year strategic cooperation agreement with the CCP, with the Chinese Communist Party, America's #1 enemy. As part of that agreement, the CCP buys large quantities of Iranian oil. 90% of the oil that Iran sells as of today, it sells to the Chinese Communist Party. So this partnership between the Chinese Communist Party, America's #1 enemy, and Iran's funding of nefarious behavior that directly impacts the United States' national security on the southern border should be enough for those who are America first to realize that the Iranian threat is not only a regional threat to Israel that the U.S. doesn't have any stake in. Iran is actually an active enemy of the United States. But then a couple minutes later, Steve Bannon asked the question in a different way to me. He brought the topic back up and asked me again to respond to those in the America First movement who oppose U.S. cooperation with Israel in taking down Iran. Have a look.
Gaza and Hamas and all that, that's a symptom of the problem, according to Beattie. It's not the problem itself. His problem, he thinks, is the Muslim Brotherhood, the financing, but the great Satan he's seen historically in his life is the Persians in Iran. And he's got one shot with an audience of President Trump to convince him to support him in a military play. Am I wrong in that? Am I just dreaming this, or is that the purpose? This purpose of the meeting is not about the replay. Not about are they going to go back to Gaza or are they going to go to the Sinai Desert? Whether you're going to have any more, whether in Judea, Samaria, you're going to take care of Hamas. Yes, those are all elements of it. But the central thing is, and what Bibi's wanted to accomplish, and he needs an American president to have his back, and he thinks President Trump is the one that's the most logical and open to his, since the Democrats allowed him essentially to get a nuclear weapon, that President Trump, who thinks outside the box, is his best shot, even though he's got leading intellectuals like Tucker Carlson, like Kurt Mills, like Darren Beattie, and dozens and dozens and dozens of others to say this is a sucker's play. Is that not the pitch in the Oval Office right now that he's making, sir?
Oh, it absolutely is, because on those other issues you mentioned, like Hamas ruling Gaza and what to do with some of these other issues, there's already agreement between the Trump administration and Bibi's administration. We know that already. The statements have already been made. It's on the Iran issue that I guess you could say we're not sure that that President Trump has been convinced by Netanyahu. But everything you're raising, Steve, speaks to the fact that there's a much larger issue here, which is, are we serious about the threat to Western civilization? Because the Sharia supremacists, the Qataris, the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Shiites in Tehran, they're very serious about their desire to defeat our civilization. And I don't see that resolve coming on our side the same way. Are we serious about winning? Are we serious about our civilization defeating the enemy that is seeking to take it over? Look what's happening in Europe. Look what's happening, with Sharia supremacy there. And I think a question to Tucker and Darren Beattie and all that side of things is: are you actually serious about this battle, this clash of civilizations? Are you willing to surrender in this clash? Are you accommodationist in this? Why are we so afraid of victory?
As opposed to the first time I answered the question, where I dealt more with the geopolitics of the situation, in this response, I was speaking to something much deeper. The Iranian regime and all of the other jihadist elements in the Middle East, much of whom are funded and backed by the Iranians, and again, by extension, they're backed by the Chinese Communist Party, actually have a goal of taking down the Western world. Think about all the unrest that we've seen throughout Europe and on American college campuses, and the impact of jihadist ideology and jihadist money flowing into the West. There is a stated goal of these jihadists, or what some call Sharia supremacists, to take down the Western world. And that is something that everyone who's America first, everyone that Steve mentioned, everyone who's in this camp who really believes in the preeminent nature of Western civilization should understand that Israel's fight is against those who are trying to take down Western civilization. There's another important point to be made here. A truly America first Middle East policy that people like Tucker Carlson and Darren, Beattie, the other people that Steve Bannon mentioned, are advocating for, wants to see America less involved in regional conflicts. It wants to see America spending less U.S. resources and certainly not having American soldiers, American boots on the ground. Any policy that allows Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, the Iranian proxies, and the Iranian regime itself to remain in power invites more conflict and more need for U.S. intervention and U.S. resources into the future. A non-interventionist Middle East policy that would also bring peace through strength is best fulfilled by giving Israel what it needs, both militarily and diplomatically, to take care of her enemies on her own. It's far less expensive, both in terms of materiel and resources and human resources, than leaving the Iranian regime in place. An America first foreign policy that seeks less direct U.S. involvement in foreign conflicts is best served by empowering strong allies to deal with regional threats so that the U.S. does not need to. This means less need for U.S. forces, for U.S. bases, for U.S. personnel in the region. This means more peace and less conflict. Military and diplomatic assistance to Israel in this context is America first.